This and more with the Harvard University Kennedy School professor Cornell William Brooks. He's the former president of the NAACP. Cornell, thanks so much for joining us. A very busy Saturday night here in Washington. First of all, what's your reaction to the breaking news that President Trump has announced through the White House press secretary that the president will be heading to Kenosha, Wisconsin on Tuesday?
Under normal circumstances in these extraordinary times, a president going to a site of civil unrest would be reassuring. In this case, it is absolutely alarming. It is frightening. The president is literally going to Kenosha, turning Air Force One into a gasoline truck. That is to say, he's bringing gas to a fire. Given his incendiary remarks during the Republican convention, given his record, given the fact that he's going to Kenosha to visit, note this, Wolf, with law enforcement and to survey the property damage. Not on his itinerary is visiting with those who are suffering bodily damage. That is to say, the brutalization of Black bodies. The fact that Jacob Blake is paralyzed, shot 7 times in the back on his son's 8th birthday while his children are watching. And the fact that the president isn't talking about him. So he's talking about visiting with law enforcement, not having a conversation, a dialogue with protesters. In other words, he's literally turning Kenosha into a political prop with the protesters as the backdrop.
So what's Cornell, what's going to be the impact, you think, if he shows up in Kenosha, doesn't meet with the family, the Blake family, for example, meets with the police, meets with others, does a little tour over there? Wisconsin, as you know, is a key battleground state, which the president did carry narrowly 4 years ago.
Well, here's what I expect to happen based upon having led many demonstrations. The president is going to make a bad situation worse. So in other words, we have 2 competing narratives. We have a presidential narrative and a protest narrative. The presidential narrative is that he is seeking votes with fear. The protesters have a narrative whereby they are literally trying to articulate the fears of Black people about being brutalized by the police, turn those real fears into hopes and votes. The president going to Kenosha literally injects this racialized fear, that is to say, he's the savior of white people who are afraid of property damage at the expense of Black lives, as opposed to being a president who's a consoler in chief, who goes in seeking to be a peacemaker, seeking to bring about justice in order to bring about peace and establish order, as opposed to settling for and seeking law and order at the expense of Black bodies. We've seen this again and again and again. And the reality is most people in this country do not trust the president to make a bad situation better, but rather make a bad situation worse when it comes to race. That is the unfortunate reality, and that's what we're contending with.
Cornell, the president was asked also today about Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old charged in the shooting deaths of 2 Kenosha protesters earlier this week. I want you to listen to what the president said.
Well, you know, that's under investigation right now, and they'll be reporting back to me over the next 24 hours, 48 hours maybe max, and we'll have a comment about it. But that is right now, we're looking at it very, very carefully.
Cornell, I want to reiterate to our viewers and to you that Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old, he's facing already 2 felony homicide charges. So what do you think of the president's reluctance to comment on this part of the Wisconsin story?
Let us know this. The president is always willing to side on the side of law enforcement relative to protesters and Black people being charged. Here, Kyle Rittenhouse has been charged by law enforcement, but the president won't say anything about it. That says everything. And the fact of the matter is, here we have a child, a 17-year-old, who's carrying an assault weapon to a march, to a protest. And the fact that the president will speak on end about looting and rioting and says nothing, not a mumbling word about somebody who carries an assault weapon, shoots, kills 2 people, shoots others, and he says nothing. That the silence by this president is an indictment.
Cornell William Brooks, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.